Hey guys, so you guys all chose for me to present on ephemeral art today. So today I present to you the elements of ephemera and if ephemeral art really can change the world. Now I know that's a very dramatic and boisterous claim to be making at the very beginning of a presentation, but I think if you stick with me till the end, then you might see what I'm talking about. So first, to answer Jason's question, what is ephemera? Ephemera, by definition, is just something that exists for a very short amount of time. So ephemeral art is art that's not meant to be preserved. So very traditional ephemeral art is something that's made anonymously out in nature using things that you found from the surrounding area, and then you put it together, leave it there for viewers to happen upon. So this is like the most pure version of ephemeral art. It's like the canon for it, but as I'm sure all of you are well aware, it doesn't take long for artists to sort of start veering off from the original, most pure version of an art form. So these three pieces by Andy Goldsworthy are the closest thing that we're going to get to pure ephemeral art today in this presentation. Andy Goldsworthy goes out into nature and scavenges for the things he wants to use in his artworks, creates them, and then leaves them there for people to discover them. So the only real rule of ephemeral art that he's breaking is that Andy takes photos of all of his works, and then he uses them online or in gallery spaces. So that's how he became a famous ephemeral artist. So Andy's only breaking one rule, really, but most artists will take ephemeral art apart and just use pieces of it in order to enhance their current art style. So my favorite example of this is Judy Chicago. These are her 1970s works, and Judy is one of the most famous feminist artists. So she does incredible work. She's had a 60-year-long career in art, and even though these are not her most famous artworks, I think they're a really great example of how an artist can take their own art style and then use elements of the ephemera to enhance that. So obviously these works are done out in nature and the artwork is interacting with the space around it, but Judy uses these color smoke canisters, which are not generally found in the natural topography of the landscape. And she also does photograph them, or she did photograph them, so now we can still study them and look at them today. So like I said, ephemera has a bunch of different elements that artists are using and taking apart to enhance their own art style. And for me, the three most interesting ones are accessibility, mortality, and recognition. So each of these topics could be their own deep dive entirely, but today we're going to do like the Applebee's sampler version of a deep dive. We're going to talk about each of these a little bit and then see how they present challenges and benefits to artists who choose to engage with them. So the first one, and my personal favorite, is accessibility. So if you think about all of the most famous artworks that we've ever had in the world, so like Mona Lisa, Girl with a Pearl Earring, Guernica, if you just typed those into the internet and just looked up what they would come up with, you have a lot of different renditions. You would have virtual copies, pictures of the pictures. They're essentially completely accessible. There's infinite accessibility to them for the general public. This concept of infinite accessibility, I think, is really important, especially when we're talking about famous artists. So if we talk about Vermeer or Botticelli or any of the Ninja Turtles, all of those artists, whether they're problematic or not, they shape the way that we look at art today. So all of their works are really important to how we view art history, as well as just the history of the world. It gives us a very rich understanding that written account can't account for. So that, as a concept, is something that's really awesome for the general public, that we all can have access to that. The issue that I have with this idea of infinite accessibility is when we apply that same concept to minority, marginalized artists. So the thing that all those artists that I talked about earlier on, besides being famous, the thing that they all have in common is that they're super dead. Like, they're not around. They don't really care if you purchased their artwork on a throw pillow and didn't really know what it was about, or if the money went to supporting the artist. They have other things I'm sure that they're worrying about now. But when we apply that same concept to artists that are in communities that are already being exploited, then you're further hindering their agency to own their own artwork. So I played with this concept in my senior showcase and the way that I let people access this work. So that's what you're seeing here on the screen. Being a queer female artist, artists like myself are vastly underrepresented in like the high art realm. So instead of giving like the most public access possible to my artwork, I decided what would like occur if instead I greatly limited the amount of artwork or the amount of people that were allowed to view the artwork at one time. So the way that I did this was I decided that the only way that people could view the senior showcase would be if at the same time I was able to view them viewing the work. So what does that look like in practice? What I did was so the gallery space that this show took place in usually has open visiting hours for like a certain amount of time during the day. So instead of doing that, I just put a note on the front door and it said, if you would like to view this artwork, contact me and I'll come let you in. And so what I noticed from this, particularly on days when there were like 1 or 2 people that I was letting into the space, is that people were acutely aware of me staring at them while they were looking at art. Some people took a lot more time to look at the pieces, to read everything that I'd written, and to engage with me in conversation, and other people left much quicker because they were uncomfortable. But I think that opens the door to have a conversation about things, particularly about access for artists. And if more artists had this concept or this ability to decide when people have access to their work, I think we could have much better conversations about how this concept of unlimited access is affecting marginalized communities. Now, that is a really big idea, even just for art. But if we apply that same thought process to other things like politics, economics, conversations about wage gaps and generational wealth, then we would be able to have more productive conversations about the ways that limiting access can affect other communities in multiple ways, not just within art. Okay, so the second element of ephemera that we're going to be talking about today is mortality, particularly mortality in art. So like I said, ephemeral art is something that in general has a very short lifespan. So if we think about how we look at important art today, we would go into a museum and all the people that work there are painstakingly preserving the art so that whomever has some money and can pay to go into the museum has the ability to view it whenever they want. The idea is that, wow, this art has stood the test of time and it's still here for me to view today. But with ephemeral art, it's more like saying, wow, this artwork has lived and breathed and moved with time. And it has changed and decayed and has become something new and different, and it's better for that. So the value in ephemeral art lies outside of the museum context, and I think that's something that's really interesting. So for one artwork or art series that I did, this is called I See the Universe Inside of You. I took people whom in my life I think the world of and brought them to my house and asked if I could interview them. And so during the interview process, I just painted these galactical sort of scenes onto wherever on their body that they chose. And then once the interview had concluded, I would photograph the work, and then they would immediately wash it off. So to be fair, I did photograph all of the works, and I did record the interviews that I was having with these people in my life. But all of that audio and these pictures that you're seeing have all been changed. They've all been enhanced and edited, photoshopped, spliced, and they became their own artworks in their own right. But the initial happening, like the initial creation of the work, the original work, is something that was only experienced between myself and these living canvases. And in doing this process, it felt like the most sincere way that I could say thank you to these people in my life. So the value in this particular artwork really lies within that experience, and it's not something that you could preserve in a museum space. It would actually be really impossible to preserve in a museum space. So this idea that of like art mortality is something that, or I guess where we find the value in art is really big for the art world, but if we apply that same idea to other things like our own mortality or the lifespan that laws and regulations have within a country, then we can have bigger conversations about how things should change and like how we can create effective change, understanding that mortality is something that's more natural and probably a more productive way to look at things. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about today, the last element, is recognition. So, like I said, in traditional ephemeral art, it's all done anonymously. But I'm sure if you asked artists like Andy Goldsworthy, he would tell you that it's very difficult to become a famous artist when all of your work is supposed to be done anonymously. So, and this is not a new concept. Also, if your artwork is shown anonymously, it's very easy for it to be overlooked. Often people don't notice anonymous work as much as they will a notable artist's work. And sometimes, if you create anonymous work, it can also just be viewed as trash, which, let me give you an example. So, for a while ago, I had the honor of showing my work at a local coffee shop for 3 months. So I had a 3-month stint where I could show any of my work in the space. And during those 3 months, I received a lot of recognition. So lots of congratulations, and I received a few opportunities to show my work at other events. And a few people approached me and said this was the first time they'd ever even known that I was doing art. And so all that recognition was awesome. It was really great for my art career. It was great for me continuing conversations about art. But what was really ironic was that at the same time that this show was going on, I was also doing these staircase installations that nobody ever asked me about. Now, so the first one is this flower scene that you can see in these 2 pictures. And what I did was go to this particular stairwell at 1 a.m. and install the work, and then left it there for 3 days and then returned super late at night to take it back down. So effectively no one saw me install the work. I did leave a little placard on the wall next to it that said the name of the work and the dates that it would be exhibited, mostly in an effort to keep the janitorial staff from taking it down the same night that I put it up. And so then for the next 3 days, I sat right here in this little stairwell in any of my free time just to see what would happen. I left a very generic email address on the placard just to see if there would be anyone that was that interested in what was going on in order to find out a little bit more about the work. The answer in this particular context with this situation was a resounding no. There were a lot of people who took pictures of it and stood by it, looked at it for a while, but nobody ever really asked me any questions about it, even though I was the only person also sitting there. In fact, the only recognition I think I got for this was a friend of mine took a picture of it and sent it to me and said, "Was this you?" with a little question mark. And at the time, there were only 3 art majors on my campus, and one was a filmmaker and the other was a musician, so I was a pretty good guess. And then this other staircase that I did is called Don't Step on My Heart, and it's all these little origami hearts that I strung together on fishing line and then hung to have a cascading waterfall effect underneath the staircase. This one I didn't leave any note, I just put it up and then sat there for a little while. And some people took pictures of it, with it as a cute backdrop, and then within the first 24 hours, the janitorial staff, super efficient, and took it all down. So it's not, like I said, a new concept or revolutionary to think that if you do work anonymously, you're not going to get recognition for it. But it's this dichotomy between the 2 spaces where I was receiving a lot of recognition and then none that shows what it's like to get an incredible amount of recognition can really catapult your career. It can move you forward, be more successful, create more opportunities for you, whereas if you don't receive recognition, virtually nothing happens. So that's cool for art, but it's much cooler if we think about it in the context of the job market, in careers, out in public. It's just a concept that ephemeral art gives us that we can talk about in a lot of different contexts other than art. So, in conclusion, do I think that ephemeral art can change the world? No, that's silly. But I do think that the conversations that can be had around ephemeral art could change it. If we look at the bigger systems that are working within ephemeral art, it gives us the space to talk about big systemic issues and deeply personal problems. And then if you choose to engage with them, I think that that could change the world. Are there any questions? Thanks, guys.